Hey YouTube, it's Ajax from Team High Society here, and we are starting part 2 of our Build a Quad series. And part 1 was the power system, which consisted of motors, ESCs, and PDB. And today we're going to be doing part 2, which consists of receiver, flight controller, and how to get all those wired together. So basically the brains of the operation here. So let me start out here with kind of a basic idea of what we're trying to do. We have the PDB, which is the power distribution board right here, and you've got battery voltage, which will run other things that your quad needs, like the video transmitter and the camera, but we'll talk about that later. This has got a voltage regulator which provides 5 volts. So the PDB provides power to the flight controller, which in this case we're going to use a Lux flight controller. And the flight controller connects to and provides power to the receiver. And this happens to be a D4R2. So basically, power from here powers the flight controller, and then also passes power through to the receiver. So that's basically what we're looking to do today. So to get started, I'll move this out of the way. And you'll notice that I haven't installed them yet, but we need to get another set of standoffs, and basically they're going to screw onto the standoffs that are used to hold the PDB to the quad. And once those are all installed, that's what will hold the flight controller. So the next part is, where do we put the receiver? Now that is going to vary greatly depending on the size of your frame and how much space you have and other constraints. But the first thing I'm going to do, since it's a small, is I'm actually going to tuck this right underneath the power distribution board. So I'm going to install it something just like that. Basically that'll keep it out of the way, and it allows us the space on the top of the frame for the video transmitter and stuff like that. So what I'm going to do here real quick is just cut a little piece of VHB. Stick that to the bottom of the PDB. And I'll put a little link in the doobly-doo up here somewhere on how to bind this to your transmitter. So, this has already been bound, so it's ready to go. I'll put a link on here somewhere where you can see a video of how to do that. Okay. So now I got that attached down there, and later on we'll show how to route these outside of the quad. But for now, we've got that installed. Okay. So now we need to talk about the flight controller a little bit. This is a Lux flight controller, and the real advantage to this is the solder pads. rather than having header pins which take up space and you have to plug into. These ones you can cut the wires and solder them directly to the board, which is very handy and saves you a lot of space, which we need on these little quads. Just a real quick note on the Lux flight controller, you have to select the voltage of your receiver, which in this case is 5 volts, and also whether or not you're going to be doing ppm or S-bus. And there's little jumpers that need to be soldered on. Now, I've got another video about the Lux flight controller, which I will annotate on here somewhere so you can see more about that. But basically, like that drawing, we've got to get power, 5 volt power, from this PDB to this flight controller. So in this case, this Polulu is taking the 4S power that's on this PDB and it's converting it to 5 volt on these two pads. So I'm going to solder some wire onto those pads and solder it onto this flight controller. So while the soldering iron's heating up there, I'm going to go ahead and cut some wire here. And if you don't have silicone wire, stop, order some. It's worth it. When you use non-silicone wire, it's more prone to being damaged by vibration and abrasion, which if you fly your quad like me, or like you should, if you're not crashing, you're not doing it right, you want all those advantages. So we're just going to strip off the ends here. Helping hands out here. Alright, just going to trim the ends real quick. Now we're going to basically tin the PDB here. Remember, we want like little convex pillows of solder on these pads. Alright, now I'm going to solder these wires, red to the positive of course. Black to the negative. Okay, so good. Now remember, our flight controller is going to mount something like that. Of course, we'll have the other two headers on there, and they may be a different size, but we're just making sure that this has the correct amount of space. Again, we're not going to go into specifics about the flight controller because you can choose whatever flight controller you want, but you need to know what pads you need to solder your power to. Some of them can do what's called VBAT, which actually allows you to, it monitors the actual voltage of your, the straight battery voltage, and there's a regulator on board, and you don't need this 5 volt source. That's not the case on the Lux here. So in this case we have a actual a specific battery connection that we need to connect to. So just trim these wires to size. And yes, I know I'm soldering this right now directly to the PDB. If you think you're going to be pulling this all apart, you may not want to do that, but I know I'm going to be building everything sitting right here without having to take this all apart, so I'm okay with soldering these two together at this point. Okay. So now we've connected the PDB to the flight controller, and now we just need to connect the flight controller to the receiver. And remember, we've got the receiver tucked in underneath here, and I've got a servo lead plugged into it, and I've cut the ends off already. And again, based on your flight controller, you're going to find the pads that you need to connect to. In this case, and almost everyone should be using either PPM or S-Bus, so you're going to have a 3-wire connection. In this case, we're using PPM, and I know where these pads are, right here on the top, so we're just going to go ahead and solder those in now. Okay, let's check our work here, make sure everything looks okay, and it does. So now we have the whole thing that we've talked about here on the paper. PDB, flight controller, receiver. So now if we plug this in, we'll get power not only to all the power systems, but it'll power our flight controller, and the flight controller passes the power on to the receiver. So pretty much the last thing we have to do here with the brains of this is to get the flight controller to connect to the ESCs and the motors. And that's where these come in. So we have the servo leads that come off of all 4 ESCs. And by default, most of them have these little servo connectors on them. But in this case, since we're not using pin headers, we're just going to solder them directly on to the flight controller. Another great thing about the Lux is, if this is the front of the quad, got a little arrow points to the front, but your motors in clean flight are 1, 2, 3, 4, and on the Lux here you can see we've got 1, 2, 3, 4. Again, this will vary based on your flight controller, but this makes it super easy. So what we're going to do is we're just going to trim these cables to length. Use my finger to strip off the fingernail to strip off the ends here. Trim the leads. and then attach them. Okay, so we've done that for number 1, and I'm just going to go ahead and continue on and do that for the remaining 3. Okay. Excuse me. Alright guys, so here we have pretty much the brains completed on this setup as well. Just an overview real quick. We have the receiver tucked underneath the PDB here, and it's connected to the flight controller, and it's passing power from the flight controller to the receiver. The flight controller is connected to the PDB, to the 5-volt regulated output, and that's how it gets its power. And then we connected all 4 of the ESCs to the flight controller. So we could tighten this all down and go put on a battery and fly this line of sight. So we've completed, at this point, we've completed the power systems and all the brains. In part 3, we'll finish this thing up by, getting the camera mounted and the video transmitter, and then we'll go fly it. So thanks for watching part 2. If you got any, found any value in this, please like and subscribe and stick around for more. Thanks a lot.